What if I told you that a Chinese dynasty, after being completely destroyed, came back to life, on the other side of the world, not as a shadow of its former self, not as a band of desperate survivors clinging to a name, but as a conquering empire, one that crushed the most powerful Islamic superpower of its age, controlled the heart of the Silk Road, and ruled over millions of people who had never even heard of China? This is not a story most people know, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why it's one of the most extraordinary tales in all of medieval history. In 1125, something that seemed impossible happened. The Liao Dynasty, a mighty empire that had ruled northern China for over 200 years, collapsed almost overnight. The conquerors were the Jin Dynasty, a rising power from the northeast. They were ruthless, fast, and unstoppable. Cities fell. Imperial armies were slaughtered. The Liao court was scattered to the winds. For almost every dynasty in history, that would have been the end. The empire would fade. The people would be absorbed. The name would be forgotten. But here's where the story takes a turn that no one, not even the Jin dynasty, could have predicted. One man refused to accept that it was over. His name was Yelü Dashi, and what he chose to do next would send shockwaves across the entire medieval world. Yelü Dashi was a Khitan prince, educated, experienced, and deeply proud of his dynasty's legacy. When the Liao capital fell, he had a choice. He could surrender and live under Jin rule. Many Khitans did exactly that. He could stage a last desperate stand in northern China, a noble death, a forgotten war, or he could do something that almost no one in history has ever done. He could take what was left of a shattered empire, a few thousand soldiers, scattered nobles, and traumatized families, and march away from everything he knew, not in retreat, not in despair, but with a plan to build something new. Yelü Dashi led his followers west, across the endless steppe, through deserts and mountain passes, thousands of kilometers from the land his dynasty had called home. And what he built when he arrived, that's where the story gets truly remarkable. By the early 1130s, Yelü Dashi had done the unthinkable. In the heart of Central Asia, a world of ancient Silk Road cities, Turkic tribal confederacies, and powerful Muslim kingdoms, a Chinese-style dynasty had taken root. Historians call it the Kara-Khitan Khanate. In China, it was known as the Western Liao. To the Muslim world, these newcomers were a mystery, conquerors from the Far East who didn't share their religion, didn't speak their language, and didn't follow their customs. And yet, crucially, they didn't try to destroy that world either. Yelü Dashi kept the Khitan administrative system. He issued coins. He collected taxes. He maintained order on trade routes that had been controlled by competing powers for generations. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. The rulers were Khitan, a people from the forests and plains of northern China. The subjects were Turkic and Persian, and almost entirely Muslim. The system of governance was borrowed from a Chinese imperial tradition. It was unlike anything Central Asia had ever seen, but the real test was coming, and it would arrive in the form of the most powerful army in the Islamic world. In 1141, the Seljuk Empire decided to deal with this new, strange power on its eastern frontier. The Seljuks were not a force to be taken lightly. For decades, they had been the dominant military power across the Islamic world, from Iran to Anatolia. Their armies were battle-hardened and enormous. What happened next sent shockwaves all the way to Europe. On the plains near Samarkand, at a battle known as Qatwan, the Kara-Khitan forces utterly destroyed the Seljuk army. The Seljuks' grip on Central Asia collapsed almost instantly. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, names that echoed through the medieval world like New York or London would today, now paid tribute to a dynasty that had been refugees barely a decade earlier. Word of this victory spread far beyond Central Asia. In parts of Europe, rumors reached Crusader kingdoms about a mysterious king in the east who had defeated the Muslims, a legend that may, at least in part, trace back to this very battle. Think about that. A fallen Chinese dynasty, rebuilt on the Silk Road, had become so powerful that Europeans were weaving it into prophecy. But empires don't last forever, and what eventually destroyed the Kara-Khitan would come not from outside, but from within. Yelü Dashi died in 1143, just 2 years after his greatest triumph. After the death of Yelü Dashi, the Kara-Khitan Khanate entered a short period of regency. His wife, Xiao Tabuyan, ruled the empire while their son was still too young to govern. Despite the transition, the state remained stable and continued to dominate the trade routes and cities of Central Asia. Around 1150, their son, Yelü Yilie, assumed power. Under his reign, the empire preserved its authority over Transoxiana, and regional rulers continued to acknowledge the supremacy of the Gurkhan. Decades later, the throne passed to Yelü Yilie, one of the last significant rulers of the Kara-Khitan state. During his rule, the empire still controlled large territories, but faced growing pressure from rising powers in Central Asia. Local rulers were becoming more independent, and the political balance that had held since the time of Yelü Dashi was beginning to weaken. It was during this period of fragile stability that a wandering Naiman prince named Kuchlug arrived seeking refuge, an event that would soon change the fate of the empire. Kuchlug arrived as a refugee, just as the Kara-Khitan themselves once had. He was the son of a powerful steppe chieftain, a prince of the Naiman tribe, but his world had recently been upended by a rising conqueror on the Mongolian steppe, a man you've probably heard of, Genghis Khan. After his defeat, Kuchlug fled west. He reached Kara-Khitan territory. He was welcomed. He was given shelter. He even married into the royal family. It was an act of hospitality that the Kara-Khitan would come to regret, because Kuchlug was not the grateful refugee he appeared to be. He was ambitious, patient, and ruthless, and over the following years he quietly built up his own base of power until around 1211, when he made his move. He seized the throne. The empire that had been built from the ashes of one dynasty had now been stolen by a man from another broken one, and he immediately began making enemies. Here's something important you need to understand about the Kara-Khitan Khanate. Its stability had always rested on tolerance. The Khitan rulers never tried to convert their Muslim subjects. They never interfered with local customs or religious practices. That neutrality, that respectful distance, was the glue that held a diverse empire together. Kuchlug threw all of that away. According to historical sources, he began restricting Islamic practices, favoring other religious groups, and forcing conversions in some areas. Whether every account is fully accurate or not, the message to the population was clear. The old order was gone, and the new one had contempt for them. Resentment spread across cities that had once been stable and prosperous. And at exactly the moment when Kuchlug needed loyal subjects, he was manufacturing enemies. Enemies who were about to have a very powerful new friend. By 1218, Genghis Khan's empire was moving west like a tide that no one had yet figured out how to stop. His armies had already swept across Central Asia's eastern frontier, and now Kuchlug, the man who had once fled from the Mongols, was sitting directly in their path. Genghis Khan sent one of his most gifted commanders to deal with him, a general named Jebe. What happened next was almost surreal. Jebe's army advanced, and instead of fierce resistance, they were welcomed. City after city, communities opened their gates. Local populations who had grown to despise Kuchlug's rule saw the Mongols not as conquerors, but as liberators. Kuchlug fled. He ran deeper and deeper into the mountains, his empire disintegrating behind him. The armies that should have defended him simply didn't. He was eventually caught and killed. And with his death, one of history's most improbable empires, born in the ruins of a Chinese dynasty, reborn on the Silk Road, destroyer of the Seljuks, quietly ceased to exist. Here's what most people miss about the end of the Kara-Khitan Khanate. Its destruction didn't just end one empire. It set off a chain reaction that would reshape the medieval world. Because once the Kara-Khitan were gone, the Mongols suddenly shared a border with a new power, the Khwarezmian Empire, and within just 1 year of the Kara-Khitan's fall, a catastrophically mishandled diplomatic incident involving Mongol merchants would trigger one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. The full-scale Mongol invasion of Central Asia had begun, the destruction of entire cities, the death of millions, the reshaping of the Islamic world for generations. It all traces back in a direct line to the final collapse of the empire built by a refugee Chinese prince who refused to give up. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, there's much more to explore. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.